Hello everyone, welcome back. I wasn't sure what to call this video. If I should consider it the first video in my Best of 2020 series or my second video in the series, because I did recently upload my best drugstore purchases of 2020. Although there will still be some drugstore products in these videos, they just may not be products that I purchased in the year 2020, whereas that video is just strictly what I purchased in 2020. You know what? I'm going to call it the first video, the first in the series. And I'm covering complexion, foundations, concealers, powders, primers, and setting sprays. Let's start with primers. 2020 was the year that I sort of strayed away from using face primers as much as I used to. I still use eyeshadow primers, and I'll get to those favorites in a second. However, for the face, I recently discovered that I don't find them all that valuable, especially considering that my foundation favorites are all very long wearing, and I've discovered some setting sprays that lock in my makeup so well, it does not budge. Now, of course, primers can do other things besides hold your makeup on. They can smooth out the look of pores and texture. They can help improve the condition of your skin over time, the hydration level. So I've chosen 3 primers that I feel do a great job at smoothing and or hydrating. And the first one is this Dior Universal Backstage Primer. It was recommended by another YouTuber, Stephanie Leda, SMLXO, who has a totally different skin type than I do, but she was raving about it, so I get influenced by influencers as well, so I purchased it. And it doesn't do anything to help control oil, so if you're oily, don't think that it's gonna do that, but I've discovered that it does give my makeup a very nice look. It's smoothing, it's hydrating, it feels good on the skin, and I just feel like my makeup looks really good when I use it. Another one that I like for the same reasons, this is the Touche Eclat Blurring Primer, and it actually does do a nice job of blurring my pores and smoothing my texture. However, if YSL is not in your budget, I did stumble upon this one from xoxo. It is the Pore Deactivator, Pore Minimizing and Mattifying Primer. I believe I picked this up when I was collecting new products for a drugstore video, and I was really, really impressed. I love doing drugstore videos because I truly find some gems when I'm not expecting it. And this was one of those occasions. This really does offer very good pore refinement, skin smoothing. I honestly should have included this in my top 10 drugstore purchases of the year. If I had gone up to my top 15 drugstore purchases of 2020, this definitely would have been in there. Now for eyeshadow primers, there's really only 3 that I reach for ever, and those are the P. Louise eyeshadow base. I buy this at the local Morphe boutique. You can also purchase it online on Morphe.com. The other eyeshadow primers I always reach for are this one from NARS, the Pro Prime. I have been using this for years. I currently use the shade medium instead. Well, I have the regular, the colorless version, but I also like the tinted versions because you can use them as cream eyeshadows. I see a lot of makeup artists use the medium or the medium dark or even the dark as a long wearing cream eyeshadow or as a base for their eyeshadow looks. So this is excellent. I always reach for this one when I'm doing a darker smoky eye. And then lastly, this has been my favorite drugstore eyeshadow primer for years as well. It's from Milani. It's just called eyeshadow primer. You can pick it up at your local CVS or Target or Walgreens for, I believe, around $5 or $6. The product itself has a little bit of a light tint to it, but it goes on clear. It can work on all skin tones, and it just does a really great job of keeping your eyeshadow on. Okay, moving on to foundation. This year has been all about the long wearing foundations for me. The year didn't start off that way. I began 2020 by raving about this foundation right here, the Estee Lauder Futurist Hydra Rescue. I believe I called this the best new foundation for mature skin, and I still stand by that statement. This foundation is amazing. Even on my oily skin, I get a decent wear time. And I know decent doesn't sound that promising, but when you consider all the other foundations that I'm going to be showing you that are super long wearing, you'll understand why decent is actually a pretty good description coming from me having such oily skin. And this one, I think it's just beautiful. It offers radiant, but not overly radiant if you're oily like me. It has medium buildable coverage. It doesn't settle into lines. It doesn't emphasize texture or pores. And as long as I pair this foundation with a good setting spray, it does last me a good 10 to 12 hours. I will say though that if you live in a humid climate or perhaps in the summertime, I tested this out in the wintertime and I really didn't touch it much over the summer because I moved over to wearing some of these others that are more transfer proof. I still feel like this is an amazing foundation and I highly recommend it. But now we're gonna move on to the foundations I have loved for years, but have been reaching for just more and more because I find them to be the most transfer proof when wearing a mask. And my number one most used foundation of 2020 has to be this Estee Lauder Double Wear. It's not for everyone. If you have extremely dry skin or a lot of rough, flaky patches, you're not gonna love this because it is quite full coverage. You can sheer it out by using a damp beauty blender or mixing in a little facial oil. There are ways to sheer it out or apply it just right out of the bottle without having it look heavy and cakey. It's genuinely one of the only foundations I've discovered that will stay on under a face mask. The other two that I've had really good luck with are both from MAC. I've had really good luck with as far as staying on under my mask. And those are the MAC Studio Fix Fluid, which I have talked about for years on my channel. If you've been with me for a while, you probably expected this foundation to be in this video. This has phenomenal coverage. It has great staying power. 9 times out of 10 when I am going to an event, which I haven't gone to in a long, long time, but once I start going to events in the future again, and when I've gone in the past, this has always been my go-to. My skin just looks flawless. I've also been using the MAC Pro Longwear Nourishing Waterproof Foundation for many years. The only reason why I ever choose my Studio Fix Fluid over the Pro Longwear is because I only have a shade in this foundation when I've self-tanned. None of their lighter shades work for me. I don't know what happened over at MAC when they were formulating this foundation, but NC35 is a great color for me, but only when I've used a little self-tanner first. I really don't have an exact match in Studio Fix Fluid either, and I really don't have an exact match in Estee Lauder Double Wear. I will put some of my closest matches in the description box for you, but I have a tendency to mix foundations. That's how I achieve my perfect shade. That said, this is a great foundation to mix into other foundations. If you own a foundation that is too sheer, you'd like a little bit more coverage, or you'd like a little bit more wear time from it, then put a couple dabs or couple dollops of this into one of your other foundations. And as I'm saying this, I'm sitting here thinking that I should try this Pro Longwear with my Estee Lauder Futurist. I bet that would make a fantastic combo. Now, while those foundations were the ones I reached for the most often, once in a while I would grab my Chanel Ultra Le Tente Velvet if I wanted just a more medium coverage. This one's probably one of the more natural looking foundations of all of the ones I'm going to show you today. I sometimes will just put a little bit in my fingers and blend it through my T-zone or even all over my face for just a quick, natural, soft, matte foundation look. I'm not one to wear real sheer foundations. I think if you've been watching my videos for 5-6 months or more, you've already come to the understanding that I'm not a sheer foundation wearer. I like more medium or buildable to full coverage. Which leads me to my two other favorites, the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish Foundation and the L'Oreal Infallible Fresh Wear. The Charlotte Tilbury is more matte and full coverage, whereas the Infallible Fresh Wear is a little bit more radiant. It's not incredibly dewy, but it has a little bit more of a skin-like finish, and it starts off as a medium coverage. I can go in with another layer to make it more full, but I like the flexibility of this foundation. To me, this foundation is very similar in feel and coverage to the Estee Lauder Futurist Hydra Rescue. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I almost forgot to talk about my favorite foundation launch of the year, the NARS Soft Matte Complete Foundation. It is maximum coverage, in my opinion. I feel like this gives me even more coverage than my Estee Lauder Double Wear. I put this on and my skin looks flawless, poreless. It stays on really, really well. It does come off a little bit on my mask, but if I use a setting spray on top of this, it really doesn't. A little bit goes such a long way with this product, but if you have drier skin, you're going to really, really want to prep first with a really good hydrating moisturizer or a hydrating primer. If you are someone that prefers a tinted moisturizer, or if you just prefer something with very light to medium coverage, this is not for you. You will not like this. But if you have oily skin and or large pores and or a lot that you would like to cover, you've got to check out this NARS. Oh boy, concealer time. I have tested out a lot of concealers this year. And I don't think any of them are new. Any of my favorites are new. I pretty much stick to my oldies but goodies, which are the NARS Radiant Creamy Concealer. I find myself going back to this all the time. I just think it's great. I have no issues with it settling into fine lines under my eyes. I think it covers great. It's just a beautiful concealer. My drugstore favorite, as many of you know, is the Milani Conceal and Perfect. I also really like the Maybelline Superstay. However, this one is a little bit more hydrating, I think, so this is my pick. This is the one I reach for more so than the Superstay now. NARS Matte Complete Concealer is another great one, especially if you have oily skin. I would not recommend this one for someone with dark circles and a very dry under eye. I would say go for the Radiant Creamy, but if you have dark circles that aren't very dry or excessively dry, this is a great concealer that really does cover well. It covers blemishes well. I have several of these. I use the lightest shade Chantilly every day to carve out under my brows, which is obviously not its intended purpose, but I love it for that. Speaking of people that have dry under eyes and dark circles and fine lines, I highly recommend that you try, if you haven't already, this Too Faced Born This Way Multi-Use Sculpting Concealer. I've actually used this product, not this particular shade, but this product as my foundation, and it works really well. It just gives great coverage. It's got everything that you want in a concealer, especially if you have mature skin and all those other things I mentioned moments ago. It feels really, really creamy, but it's not so creamy that it develops those creases under the eyes. That's the only thing that I find is problematic with very creamy concealers. I find that sometimes creamy concealers can be thick and creamy. And when they're thick and creamy, they have good coverage, but after a couple of hours, they just start to really dry and crack and make your under eye look so aged, which is not what we want. Not what we want at all. We want our under eyes to look bright and smooth, and this one really does a good job at that. I'm also really liking this one from Chanel. This one was I discovered it just a couple of months ago, or maybe even a month ago, when I put up my full face of Chanel video. I wanted to try some new products. I had a bunch of older products I was using, but I wanted to try the concealer because it had been years since I had tried it, and this is really good as well. It reminds me a lot of the NARS Radiant Creamy. It's not quite as creamy feeling as the NARS, but as far as wear time and the coverage, it's very similar. However, a huge difference between the two is that the NARS comes in a lot more shades. I find myself reaching for this Chanel one a lot, but that could also be that I just don't want an expensive Chanel concealer to go to waste. Now, I don't want you to think that's the only reason why I'm using it. If it was no good, I definitely wouldn't use it regardless, but I don't think any of us want to waste pricey makeup. Moving on to powders. My number one go-to pressed touch-up powder for years and years has been MAC's Blot Powder. I use the shade Medium Dark because they run very, very light, but I keep one in my car, I keep one in my purse, I have them all over the house because it is the only touch-up powder that I can use over and over throughout the day without messing with my makeup or having me look cakier and cakier as the day goes on. As I said earlier, for those of you that might not know, I have not just slightly oily skin, but really, really oily skin. I need to touch up or blot at least 5 times a day. I've never really counted, but it feels like I'm always needing to touch up. And that has been my favorite powder, as I said, for years. The other pressed powders I use are mostly for setting my makeup right after I've completed it and giving it sort of an airbrushed look or setting my under eye concealer. The two powders I use for setting my under eye concealer are the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish Powder and the number 7 Lift and Illuminate Powder. And then my top 3 most used loose powders are the Huda Beauty Easy Bake Loose Setting Powder. I use the shade Pound Cake, and I'll mostly use that as another option for setting my under eye concealer, but then I'll also dust a little bit of it in the center of my face for brightening. Maybe it's just the nature of my job as a YouTuber, but I am always losing the lids off of my loose powders, which is why I'm not showing them all to you and just putting some photos on the screen because I just don't know where the caps are. That's so weird, isn't it? But I digress. This is the By Terry Hyaluronic Loose Powder. This is so good, especially if you have, you guessed it, more mature skin. It's pricey, but worth it. It smooths everything, gives a beautiful airbrushed look. There's also a pressed version of this powder now that's also quite beautiful. In that same Chanel video I was talking about moments ago, I tested out the Poudre Universelle Natural Finish Loose Powder. This has also become a new favorite of mine. Similar to the By Terry, it gives a very beautiful, smoothed look. My pores just seem to disappear. It's not oil controlling per se, but it does give a beautiful finish. One thing about the By Terry loose powder that I almost forgot to mention is that it does contain hyaluronic acid. It is in the name of the product, the By Terry Hyaluronic Hydrating Powder, but I wanted to reiterate the fact that if you have drier skin, this is an excellent powder choice. Now, if you have oily skin and you are looking for a powder that will help to control oil, I have another one for you that is missing a cap. It's like socks. Socks and powder caps go missing in my house. This is the Nakia Joy Velvet Finishing Powder. Nakia Joy, if you're unfamiliar with her, she is a fantastic YouTube content creator in the beauty space here on YouTube, and she has oily skin. And while we don't always agree on our favorite products for oily skin, she did do a wonderful job formulating this powder. And it is one of the only powders that I have ever used that actually does help to control oil, as much as one can control oil on a super oily skin. Now, I don't know about other YouTubers. Perhaps they have 3, 4, 5, 6 setting sprays that they're showing you in their best of the year videos. I don't. I have 2. The Hourglass Veil Soft Focus Setting Spray and the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless finish setting spray. Both of these are amazing, but they do different things, in my opinion. The Hourglass Veil leaves a very fine mist. That's not how I apply it. I don't know why I just did that, but I don't want to apply 2 different setting sprays on my face. I mean, I guess I could. We'll do this side with the Hourglass. It dries really quickly. I love how fine the mist is, and it gives this soft focus effect to my makeup. The Charlotte Tilbury also has a really nice fine mist. It's a little bit wetter. It definitely goes on wetter. It smells amazing though. I love the smell of this. I find though that this one really locks in my makeup better. I think I've inhaled too much setting spray. Okay, so what I was trying to say is that this one does give a beautiful soft focus effect, and it does keep your makeup on for a long time. But if I had to choose between the two, if you're looking for long wear, I would go with the Charlotte Tilbury, especially if you are wanting to lock it all down before you put on a mask. Because really, who's gonna see that soft focus effect when half your face is covered up? Now, before I finish up, I do wanna talk about my 3 favorite tools for foundation application, because that's something I get asked about a lot. My number 1 tool that I use for all of these foundations is the Stands Out Beauty Sponge. Mine is dirty. I will put a photo of a clean one and how it comes in the box on the screen. I just love this. I know some people don't love it. They think it's weird because it feels like memory foam, but I no longer use a beauty blender on my face whatsoever. I always use this sponge. Well, not always. If I'm using a sponge, this is what I use. My other choices for foundation brushes are this one from IT Cosmetics. It is the Heavenly Luxe Foundation Brush. And I also really like this brush from BK Beauty. It is the 101 foundation brush. It's angled, and you can really get in this area right here. This is where I have issues with really large pores. So I like to sort of press the brush in here. And then I also love it for bringing foundation down my neck and on my chest and over my ears. It's just a really unique foundation brush shape. So those are some of the tools that I use to apply my favorite foundations. My favorite tools for blending out concealer are my e.l.f. Camo Concealer Sponge, and then also this brush right here from Sephora Collection. Then for my powders, I usually reach for the BK Beauty powder brush. Whew, okay, I feel like I've been talking for hours. I will put timestamps in the description box for where everything is: foundations, concealers, powders, primers. So if you need to come back and reference this video, it should be a little bit easier for you. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you are not already a member of the Risa Does Makeup family, please hit that subscribe button and join us. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under the exact same username. It's all Risa Does Makeup. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you will stay tuned for the next video in my Best of 2020 series.